I had already gone a week without being able to reach my son after the huge fight between him and my daughter-in-law. Desperate with worry, I drove over to their house in the suburbs of Phoenix, but suddenly the spare key I had didn't open the front door anymore. In the end, I had to hire a locksmith. When the door finally sprang open, the man spun around abruptly, his face pale. "You shouldn't go in there." I roughly pushed his arm aside and stepped inside, and what I saw in the house froze me to the core. But before I continue, make sure you're subscribed to the channel and let us know in the comments where you're watching this video from. We'd love to know how far our stories of vengeance reach. I sat down at the old kitchen table in that small galley kitchen, with a cup of coffee in front of me that was already stone cold. The clock on the wall marked exactly 9 o'clock on a Tuesday morning, and every tick-tock seemed to stretch the anxiety in my chest even further. It had been a whole week since I last heard the voice of Robert, my son, on our usual morning call. His voice always sounded warm, even if it was just a few words. "How are you doing, Mom? I'm swamped right now. I'll call you tonight." But now it had been 7 days. Not a call, not a text, just a terrifying silence. At first, I told myself that maybe he was just busy. Robert is a lawyer. His job at the big corporate firm always had him up to his neck, full of meetings. Or maybe he forgot, as sometimes sons can be a little careless with their mothers. But then the second day came, then the third, and my WhatsApp messages only showed the 2 grey check marks, sent, but never converted to read. The worry started eating away at me from the inside. I called his number, and every tone rang until the call went straight to voicemail. "The number you have dialed is not available at this moment." That cold, repetitive voice was like a knife in my heart. I tried calling Valerie, my daughter-in-law. The phone just rang and rang, but nobody answered. It was always the same, as if both of them were purposely avoiding me. I didn't want to think the worst, but that feeling of unease was growing inside me, like a storm about to break. Finally, I called the firm where Robert worked. The receptionist answered me in a monotone voice. "Mr. Robert hasn't come in all week, ma'am. We haven't been able to contact him either." That sentence hit me like a physical blow. Robert was always responsible. He would never miss work without calling in. Something was very wrong. I couldn't just sit there anymore. With trembling hands, I grabbed my car keys without even changing out of my pajamas. From my home downtown to their house in the Phoenix suburbs isn't a long drive. But that day, every mile seemed like an eternity. I was driving with my eyes fixed on the highway, but my mind was a total mess. I saw Robert's face, his beaming smile on his wedding day, the way he hugged me tight and said, "Mom, don't worry, I'll be fine." Where was he now? Where was Valerie? Why wasn't anyone answering me? When I turned onto their street, a strange feeling came over me. The whole neighborhood was so quiet it seemed dead. The houses had closed doors, lowered blinds, as if the whole world were asleep. Robert and Valerie's house appeared before me, but it no longer looked like the home I remembered. The front door was tightly locked, the curtains were completely drawn, with no signs of life. I got out of the car, my legs heavy, as if something invisible was holding me back. I rang the doorbell once, twice, then many more times. The sound of the chime was lost in the silence, but I didn't hear footsteps, not a single response. I pressed my ear to the wooden door, hoping to catch even a faint sound, the TV, running water, anything. But there was only silence, a cold and terrifying silence. My heart was pounding hard. I took out the spare key that Robert had given me a few years ago. "Keep it, Mum, in case Valerie and I are out for a long time," he had told me with a mischievous smile. I put the key in the lock, but it only went in halfway, and then it got stuck. I tried turning it gently, then with more force, but it was useless. They had changed the lock. Someone didn't want me to enter. I stood there, the key still clenched in my hand, feeling as if the whole world was crumbling. Why had they changed the lock? Robert would never do something like that without telling me. Valerie wouldn't either. She was always thoughtful. She always called me Mum, with a sweet voice. Something was very odd. Just then, I heard a banging noise from the house next door. Mr. Eugene, the elderly neighbor, was fixing his wooden fence. I walked over, trying to force a smile to hide the worry I felt inside. "Hi, Mr. Eugene," I said, my voice a little shaky. "How are you? Have you seen Robert or Valerie lately?" Mr. Eugene took off his work gloves, wiped the sweat from his forehead, and looked at me with a certain pity in his eyes. "Hello, Mrs. Mary," he replied, in a low voice. To be honest, it seems strange to me, too. I haven't seen either of them all week. The last time I heard anything from that house was Tuesday night. It was a really bad fight, ma'am. I heard shouting, and then something breaking, like glass being thrown against the wall. His words were like a lightning bolt, hitting me. They fought? Robert and Valerie almost never raised their voices, at least not in front of me. They were always a harmonious couple, holding hands at family dinners, laughing as if nothing in the world could separate them. Respect and boundaries are essential foundations for any family. We must always remember that our loved ones deserve to be heard and have their personal space honored, even when we disagree. It's how we build strong, trusting connections that last, and it's the right thing to do. But those screams, that sound of something breaking, brought back memories of my days as a police officer, crime scenes I investigated, places full of chaos, dark secrets behind closed doors. My former agent's instinct was activated, so strong I couldn't ignore it. I thanked Mr. Eugene, trying to keep the calm in my voice, and went back to the car. My hands trembled as I pulled out my phone and searched for the number of a 24-hour locksmith service that I had saved a long time ago. "Hello, I need to get a lock opened right now," I said urgently. "In the Phoenix suburbs. Please come quickly." Less than 20 minutes later, a young man named Mike showed up, carrying an old toolbox. He looked at the lock, nodded, and got to work. I stayed next to him, my hands clasped together, trying not to shake. Every second passed as if it were a century. Finally, a clear click sounded in the silence. The door cracked open, but Mike suddenly stepped back, his face pale. "Mom," he said in a shaky voice, "you better not go in." His words sounded like a warning, but I couldn't stop. Robert was my son. He was my blood. If something had happened, I had to know. I gently pushed Mike aside and shoved the door open to enter. Immediately, a strong smell of chemicals hit my nose. A mixture of bleach and ammonia, so penetrating that I started coughing uncontrollably. I covered my mouth with my hand, my eyes burned, but I kept moving forward. What I saw chilled my heart. The living room where I used to sit and laugh with them on weekends was now a total disaster. The sofa was overturned, as if someone had thrown it in a fit of rage. A table lamp lay smashed on the floor, with pieces of glass sparkling under the faint light filtering through the curtain. The closet doors were wide open. There was clothing everywhere, as if someone had rummaged desperately. On the coffee table, a bottle of red wine had spilled completely, and the dry stain formed a dark purple patch, like blood on the wood. I called out loudly, my voice cracking. "Robert! Valerie! Is anyone home?" But only the echo of my own voice answered me. I entered the bedroom. Every step weighed more heavily on me. The sheets were messed up, the blankets and pillows on the floor. Both of their closets were empty. Not a single garment remained. I opened the dresser drawer, where Valerie used to keep their passports and documents, but there was nothing. Their suitcases, the same ones I helped them pack for vacations, had also disappeared. I took a deep breath, trying to contain the fear that was roaring inside me, and dialed David's number. David was my student years ago, a bright young man I guided from his first days as a cadet. Now he was the head of the criminal investigations team in Phoenix. Mrs. Mary, his voice said on the phone, warm but with a hint of worry when he heard my brief story. Don't worry, I'm on my way. They were just a few words, but his calmness was exactly what I needed not to break down. Less than an hour later, 2 patrol cars were parked in front of the house. One was marked for surveillance, with red lights flashing. The other was from the investigation team. 2 young officers got out of them, still too new to the job to hide their discomfort in facing me. A former colleague they surely would have heard about. They entered the house, notebooks in hand, scanning the scene with an indifference that deeply unnerved me. I walked behind them, holding back the urge to direct them like in the old days. They took a quick look around the living room, wrote something down, and stopped in front of the bedroom. One of them, who couldn't have been more than 25 years old, asked me in a monotonous voice, "When was the last time you spoke to your son, Mrs. Miller?" Note, changed Garcia to Miller to fit US context. The question sounded like a routine procedure, without an ounce of emotion. I told them everything, in full detail. Robert's last call the morning of last Tuesday, the series of unread messages, the changed lock, Mr. Eugene's testimony about the fight, and the sound of breaking glass. I pointed out the mess in the room: overturned chairs, broken lamps, clothes thrown around, and I emphasized the strong smell of cleaning products that still permeated the air. The second officer, wearing glasses, nodded, looking at the empty closet. "It looks like they packed their things and left in a hurry, ma'am," he said, in a firm tone, as if he had just solved a mystery. "Maybe they argued and decided to leave. It's not uncommon." I looked at him, feeling my blood boil. Not uncommon. That's my son, Robert, whom I raised to face problems, not to run away. And Valerie, that smart, sweet girl whom I consider a daughter, she would never leave without a word. I tried to stay calm while speaking, but every word cost me as if I had to rip it from my chest. If they left, why did they change the lock? Why is the floor so extremely clean, while everything else is a total mess? Don't you smell the bleach? Who cleans the floor that meticulously just before running away? I pointed to the living room floor, where the ceiling light revealed diffused mop marks, as if someone had tried to erase a secret. The 2 police officers looked at each other, visibly uncomfortable for a moment. The one with glasses wrote something down in his notebook, but I knew they weren't taking that detail seriously. "We'll report it to our superiors," he said with an educated but distant voice. They took some photos of the scene, collected Robert and Valerie's personal data, and then put together a file with an empty title: "Disappearance of a couple." As they were about to leave, I stood in the doorway. "You can't just leave like this," I said, my voice trembling from holding back. "This is not a simple runaway. There is something wrong here, and I need you to take this seriously." The younger officer looked at me with an expression of slight compassion. "We understand how you feel, Mrs. Miller, but for now there are no signs of a crime. We will investigate further." Those words felt like a slap in the face. Understand how I feel? No, they can't. No one can understand what it feels like when your whole world, your only son, your greatest pride, disappears as if he never existed. When they left, leaving an official seal on the door, I stood there, looking at the house that was now nothing more than a cold shell. I drove back home with my mind blank, but with a heavy heart. My house, which used to be full of Robert's laughter when he was a child, now felt suffocatingly silent. I walked into the old study, where I used to spend hours analyzing case files. The small wooden box was still on the shelf, covered by a thin layer of dust. I opened it and took out my bronze police badge, its surface dulled by the passing years. I clenched it tightly in my hands, the cold metal seeping into my bones. I had solved some of the most complicated cases. I had faced dangerous criminals without showing fear. But now, faced with the danger threatening my own son and daughter-in-law, I felt more powerless than ever. I sat in the chair, staring at the badge, and memories flooded me. Those nights when Robert would sit next to me, his eyes shining as I told him about my cases. "Mum, you're amazing," he used to tell me, pride in his voice. "I want to be like you too, live for justice." And now? Where is he? Am I failing the son I swore to protect with my whole life? It takes courage, but protecting yourself and speaking the truth is always the right choice. In the face of uncertainty, honesty is the first step toward finding peace and reclaiming your power, even if the world around you tells you to keep quiet. Never sacrifice your safety for silence. That night, I couldn't sleep. I turned on my laptop and went to the city news site. A short note appeared, sharp as a razor. Phoenix police search for missing young couple. Below it, Robert and Valerie's wedding photo. Their radiant smiles cruelly reminded me of the happy days that would never return. I looked into Robert's eyes in the image, searching for a sign, a clue, anything. But I only found silence. I picked up the phone, slid my finger across the screen, and dialed his number one more time. I knew I was fooling myself, but I still held on to hope, even if it was a tiny spark. The dial tone rang, and then that robotic voicemail voice. "The number you have dialed is not available at this moment." I rested my head on the table. "Robert, where are you?" I whispered, but no one answered. 3 days passed, but for me, they were like an eternity. Every morning when I woke up, I wished for a call from David, or even Robert, with his familiar voice. "Mom, sorry for worrying you." But the phone remained silent. It only lit up with meaningless advertising messages. News about the missing couple had already been relegated to the corners of local newspapers, replaced by traffic accidents or upcoming community events. The world kept spinning, but for me, it had stopped the day I walked into that empty house. On Wednesday morning, the phone vibrated. David's name appeared on the screen, and I felt my heart tighten. His voice on the other end of the line was low and serious, nothing like the joking boy he used to be. "Mrs. Mary, do you have a moment? I need to see you. It's not something I can talk about over the phone." He asked me to meet him at an old diner near the precinct, where we used to spend hours after night shifts, sharing stories about work and life. I accepted immediately, although deep down I already knew that this meeting wouldn't bring good news. I arrived early and chose a table in a secluded corner of the place, where the smell of toasted coffee hit strongly, but couldn't dispel the cold I felt inside. I ordered a black coffee, no sugar, just to have something in my hands so they wouldn't shake. When David walked in, I recognized him immediately. He wasn't wearing his uniform. He had on a simple t-shirt, but his sunken eyes and tired face said he hadn't slept well. He placed a thin folder on the table, but didn't open it right away, as if he was evaluating whether I had the strength to hear what was coming. "Mrs. Mary," David began, his voice soft but firm. "I just received information from the Controlled Substances Investigation Group. They've been following a large synthetic drug trafficking network for months, and..." He paused. He looked me straight in the eyes, as if he wanted to apologize before speaking. Valerie Montiel's name appeared several times in the wiretaps and seized records from arrests made last week. I felt my blood run cold. Valerie? My daughter-in-law, the same one I hugged on her wedding day, the one who always called me Mum, with that sweet smile. I shook my head, almost reflexively. No, David. Valerie is a chief accountant, a smart and responsible woman. She can't be involved in that. But David didn't stop. He opened the folder, pulling out a blurry photo, clearly taken from afar by a surveillance camera. In the image, Valerie was in a lonely parking lot, talking to a tough-looking man with tattoos all over his arm. She was wearing a hooded sweatshirt that covered her head, but I immediately recognized her posture. Mrs. Mary, David continued, in an even heavier tone. The investigation group's hypothesis is that Valerie is not only involved, but she has an important role in this network. And he stopped again, as if he knew what was coming next would devastate me. They believe Robert is her accomplice. My ears were ringing. The glass on the table trembled when I accidentally touched it. No, I said with a broken voice, almost shouting. It can't be, David. You know Robert. You know how I raised him. Respect for the law was the first thing I taught him since childhood. Robert would rather starve than do anything illegal. I looked at him, hoping to see even a spark of doubt in his eyes. A sign that he didn't believe in that theory either. But he only returned my gaze with that mix of compassion and respect that I had seen before, when I was his boss. Mrs. Mary, I understand how you feel, David said in a low voice. But everything matches. The messy house, the missing items, the passports that are gone. Everything indicates they fled in a hurry. The smell of chemicals might be because they tried to destroy some amount of drugs before leaving. And the fight the neighbor heard, perhaps it was because Robert and Valerie couldn't agree on running away after knowing the network was about to be dismantled. Every word from David was like a hammer blow against my faith. I thought of Robert, of those nights he sat next to me, listening to my case stories with shining eyes. Mum, justice is more important than anything, he used to tell me with a determined voice. I thought of Valerie, the girl who always carefully set the table during family meals, who always asked me how I felt with genuine concern. How could they be drug traffickers? How could they betray everything I taught them, everything I believed in? David pushed the file towards me, but I didn't touch it. I didn't want to see more proof. I didn't want to see letters or images that would turn my son into a criminal. The police will soon issue an arrest warrant for both of them, David said, lowering his voice slightly. I'm telling you first because I respect you, but I promise I will continue investigating. There's something about this case that doesn't sit right with me, but I can't confirm anything yet. I didn't answer. I just nodded mechanically, like a puppet pulled by strings. I thanked David, stood up, and left the diner. Outside, the bright Arizona sun hurt my eyes, but I didn't feel any warmth. My whole world was crashing down. I walked without knowing where I was going, only knowing that every step hurt as if I were stepping on my own heart. I drove back home, but I don't remember what streets I passed. My home, which used to overflow with Robert's and family's laughter, now felt cold as a tomb. I went inside, slammed the door shut, and a feeling of crushing loneliness hit my chest. I went straight to the study, where I still kept souvenirs from my time in the service. The dim light of the desk illuminated the portrait of David, my husband, who passed away more than 20 years ago. His smile was still warm in the photo, but today he seemed to look at me with a certain reproach. Mary, you promised to take care of Robert. I thought I heard his voice. On the table was a photo of Robert the day he graduated from law school, his radiant smile, his eyes full of faith in the future. I sat down, touched the photo frame, and the memories came back, so sharp they hurt. I remembered those nights when Robert was a child, curled up next to me on the couch, his eyes wide open as I told him about the cases. "How did you catch that thief, Mum?" he would ask curiously. I talked to him about justice, truth, the responsibility of protecting the innocent. "I want to be like you when I grow up," he would tell me, and I believed I was instilling the right values in him. When Robert decided to become a lawyer for a big firm, I felt so proud I almost cried. My son chose an honest path, I thought, and I dreamed of the day he would achieve something great. Then, Valerie entered our lives. The first time Robert brought her home to introduce her, I was immediately impressed. A young woman with long black hair, a gentle smile, and an intelligent and charming way of speaking. "Mum, this is Valerie," Robert introduced her, his eyes shining with happiness. Valerie was the chief accountant at the same firm as Robert, a position that required precision and trust. She hugged me and called me Mum, with a warm voice, and I thought, my son has found the perfect partner. I loved Valerie like a daughter. I even imagined the day I would hold my first grandchild, hearing children's voices running through this house. But now, in light of what David revealed, those memories were distorted, like a stained painting. I remembered a surprise visit one weekend. Valerie opened the door with her usual smile, but there was something tense in her gaze. "Mum, why didn't you tell me you were coming?" she said in a joking tone, but she was gripping the edge of the door tightly. She invited me into the living room, made tea, but when I went to the kitchen to get more water, she rushed to stop me. "The kitchen is a mess, Mum. You better sit and rest," she said, with a forced smile. At the time, I thought it was just embarrassment, but now I wonder, what was she hiding in that kitchen? Another memory came to mind, even clearer. At my birthday party a few months ago, I asked both of them about their plans to have children. Valerie smiled and answered happily, "Yes, we've been thinking about it, but we want to wait until work is more stable." But I noticed Robert's gaze for just a second. That look didn't have its usual shine, but worry, as if he were hiding a big secret. He quickly looked down at his plate, but I saw it, and now that moment pierces me like a dagger. "Robert, what did you want to tell your mother? Why didn't you?" One afternoon, I stopped by to drop off some homemade chicken pot pie. As I entered the living room, I accidentally saw a large cardboard box, unlabeled, carefully wrapped with tape, hidden behind the bookshelf. It looked out of place. It didn't fit with anything else in the house. "What is that?" I asked without thinking. Valerie appeared from the bedroom with a somewhat tense smile. "Oh, it's a gift for an important client, Mum," she answered quickly, almost too quickly. "They're very demanding. That's why I wrapped it like that." I nodded, not thinking much more about it. But now the image of that box returns to me as a great mystery, a gift, or something much darker. All those pieces of memories that previously seemed harmless now fit into a terrifying picture. Valerie's subtle evasiveness, Robert's worried look, the mysterious box. I sat there, still clutching the photo frame, and the sadness gave way to something else. A determined coldness, like a flame rising from the ashes. I do not believe the police hypothesis. Robert could not have been an accomplice. My son was not that kind of person. And if Valerie was really involved with drugs, maybe Robert discovered it, and that's why Mr. Eugene heard the argument. It's possible the police are following the wrong lead, and I can't sit around waiting for them to correct it. Always lead with kindness and patience. These quiet virtues show true strength and can turn a difficult moment into an opportunity for growth. Acting with integrity is the key to building a life you can be proud of, and it's the best way to honor your values. I stood up, went to the shelf, and took down the high-powered flashlight, which I still kept from my years as an officer. It weighed in my hand as a reminder of the days when I faced the darkness without fear. I grabbed my keyring, checked my cell phone, and looked at Robert's photo one more time. "I'm going to find you, son," I whispered, my voice trembling but full of determination. "Whatever the truth is, I'm going to find out." I drove back to Robert and Valerie's house, although it was already dark. I picked up the phone and dialed David's number without a second thought. When he answered, I didn't ask, I didn't plead. I simply informed him, with a voice as cold as when I still stood in front of the investigation team. "David, I need to get back into the house. Your hypothesis has flaws. Give me 30 minutes, not as a mother, but as a police officer." Perhaps my tone took him by surprise. He was silent for a few seconds and then replied, "Mrs. Mary, this is not within protocol, but fine. I'll see you there. 30 minutes." I arrived earlier, standing in front of Robert and Valerie's house, which was now just a dark shadow. The police seal was still stuck on the door, but it was not an obstacle for me. David appeared shortly after, with a look that mixed worry and respect. "Mrs. Mary, I will only let you in if I go with you, and the scene cannot be altered." I nodded, not wanting to waste time arguing. He removed the seal, pushed the door open, and we went in. It was the second time I had set foot in that house. The smell of chemicals had faded a bit, but the chaos remained intact. The overturned sofa, the fragments of glass from the broken vase scattered across the floor, and the dry wine stain on the coffee table were still there, as a reminder of what had happened. I put on the rubber gloves I had brought and turned on the professional flashlight I used to use in old cases. The white, cold beam swept the room, and I felt David's presence behind me, watching silently. I started in the living room, where everything seemed to have been scrambled by panic. I turned off all the lights in the house so only the flashlight illuminated. I knelt on the floor and ran the light beam low across the tile, moving slowly. Just as I suspected, the cleaning marks came into view, crisscrossed like a messy drawing. They were concentrated right next to the broken table, where the dry wine looked like blood. "David, look at this," I said in a hoarse voice. "This is not normal cleaning. Someone tried to erase a difficult stain and did it with great dedication." David crouched down, his gaze sharpened. "You're right, but what kind of stain was it?" We didn't need the answer. We both knew where that question led. I got up and went to the kitchen, where the smell of chemicals still lingered in the air. The trash can under the sink had already been checked by the police, but I doubted they had done it thoroughly. I dumped it out onto the floor without thinking, ignoring David's surprised look. Among wrappers and common bags, I found what I was looking for. 2 large bottles of bleach, 1 of ammonia, and 1 more of industrial floor cleaner. "Have you seen anyone use so many chemicals to clean a house?" I asked him sarcastically. David shook his head, his face more serious than ever. I went back to the living room, determined not to miss any detail. I knelt down and shone the light under the sofa, under the bookcase, but only found dust and meaningless trash. Then, when I ran the light under the drinks cabinet in the corner, something metallic glittered. My heart skipped a beat. I took a long ruler from my purse and carefully dragged the object out. When I had it in my hand, I almost ran out of breath. It was Robert's wedding ring, white gold, the same one I helped him choose for his wedding. But what made me tremble was the dark, dried blood trapped in the delicate engravings of the ring. David came closer, staring at the ring in my hand. Mrs. Mary, he whispered, but didn't finish the sentence. His expression changed from suspicion to genuine concern. I squeezed the ring hard. It felt like it was burning my palm. "This is blood, David," I said, my voice shaky but firm. "And I bet it's Robert's." I didn't dare to keep thinking, but the image of my son, wounded, lying somewhere in that house, made my eyes sting. I knew I needed more information, and only the neighbors could help me. I left the house and went straight to Mrs. Pilar's house, an elderly woman who lived right behind Robert's house. Mrs. Pilar was sitting in an armchair, knitting under the warm light of a lamp. When she saw me, she smiled, but her smile faded when she noticed my expression. "Mrs. Pilar," I said, trying to keep calm. "I need your help. The night of last Tuesday, did you see or hear anything strange at Robert's house?" Mrs. Pilar narrowed her eyes and put her knitting aside. "Let me think," she said in a low voice. "That night there was some thunder. I couldn't sleep. Around midnight, I heard the back door of their house opening. That was strange, because normally they only use the front door. I got curious, so I slightly opened the curtain and looked. I saw the young woman, Valerie, alone, trying to drag a very large suitcase from the house to her car. It looked like she was struggling with it. The suitcase was very heavy. The car was already parked right in front of the back door. My heart sank. "Did you see Robert?" I asked, my voice choked. Mrs. Pilar shook her head, firm. "No, she was alone. After putting the suitcase in the trunk, she sped off. The tires squealed when she started, I remember clearly." Her words were like a knife. Valerie, alone, dragging a suspiciously heavy suitcase, at midnight, through the back door. I didn't want to think the worst, but the image of the bloody ring came back to my mind, and I had to bite my lip not to burst into tears in front of the elderly woman. I returned to David, who was standing next to the patrol car, his face tense. "David," I said, my voice hoarse. "Valerie left through the back door, alone, with a suitcase that seemed too heavy. Why do it secretly? Doesn't that seem strange to you?" David didn't answer immediately. He looked at me with a moment of doubt in his eyes, but then he pulled out his phone and said with a firm voice, "I need the crime scene investigation team here now, to the backyard, now." I stood there, my heart racing, feeling that every second that passed brought us closer to the truth, although I didn't know if I would have the strength to face it. Less than an hour later, the small backyard behind the house was lit up by the investigation team's floodlights. The noise of the equipment and the low voices of the experts broke the silence of the night. I stood a few feet away from them, my hands clasped, trying not to tremble. A technician, dressed in white coveralls, slowly passed a UV flashlight over the concrete path that ran from the back door to the gate. The violet light swept the surface, and I held my breath, waiting for a sign, anything. They stopped in a corner of the lawn, right next to the back door. Another officer, wearing gloves, took out a vial with a luminol solution. They sprayed the grass, and in the darkness, strange bluish stains began to appear, like lost stars in a black sky. They were signs of blood. Blood that had been carefully cleaned but not completely. The stains formed a faint trail that led toward the gate. I felt my legs give way, but I bit my lip hard, forcing myself to stay standing. At the same time, another investigator raised his hand as a sign of warning, pointing to the concrete walkway. Under the angled light of the headlights, a long, blurry mark became visible. It wasn't a tire track, nor a footprint. It was the mark of something heavy that had been dragged across the concrete, from the back door to the entrance. "Mrs. Mary, you should see this," he said, his voice low but tense. I approached. Every step was like stepping on my own fear. That mark, cold and sharp, told a story I didn't want to believe. The technical team began taking samples of the shining traces on the grass, carefully placing them in small test tubes. They worked with the precision of those accustomed to facing cruel truths. But I knew, deep down, that I had already figured out the result. Blood on the grass, blood on Robert's wedding ring. Everything screamed a truth I didn't want to accept. I stood next to David, feeling the world shrink, leaving only me and those bluish flashes. "David," I said with a trembling voice, but every word as sharp as steel. "Robert didn't run away. According to my hypothesis, my son was murdered right here, in this house." Valerie cleaned the scene with chemicals. The wedding ring came off during the struggle. There was probably a fight. Afterward, she dragged his body, maybe wrapped in a blanket or something, to the back entrance, where a car was waiting. That heavy suitcase Mrs. Pilar saw didn't contain clothes or belongings. It carried Robert. Every word that came out of my mouth was like a stab to my own heart. I felt like I couldn't breathe, but I couldn't stop. The logic of a police officer had displaced the pain of a mother. I looked at David, expecting him to contradict me, but he only remained silent, his eyes full of sadness. "Mrs. Mary," he started to say, but then his phone vibrated. He answered, listened in silence, and I saw his face harden. He ended the call and turned to me, his voice grave. "The rapid results just came in. The blood sample on the grass. It matches Robert's DNA." I stood paralyzed, feeling the ground crumble beneath my feet. I had prepared myself. I had already voiced that hypothesis. But when the truth was confirmed, it felt like a blow that left me breathless. Robert, my son, my blood, had bled in the very house he once called home. I put my hand to my chest, trying to breathe, but the tears were already running down my cheeks, hot and full of pain. "Why, Robert?" I whispered, but no one answered. David put his hand on my shoulder, a gentle but heavy gesture. "Mrs. Mary, I'm so sorry," he said in a husky voice. "But you were right. This is no longer a disappearance." He pulled out his radio, and his firm voice echoed in the night. "To all units, attention, change the case from disappearance to homicide. Primary suspect, Valerie Montiel, issue a nationwide arrest warrant. Identity information and vehicle license plates will be sent immediately. Danger level, extremely high." After the DNA results confirmed that the blood in the yard was Robert's, the police went on maximum alert. The arrest warrant for Valerie Montiel was sent to all stations across the state. Her image appeared on the news, on giant screens at bus terminals, and on flyers pasted in markets. I sat in an empty house, watching the news on television, and every time I saw Valerie's face, I felt my heart twist. How could she do something like that? How could she betray Robert? Betray me? The cybercrime investigation team intervened. They accessed data from the automated license plate recognition system on the federal highways. Just a few hours later, David called me, his voice hurried. "Mrs. Mary, we have a lead. Valerie's car passed through the toll booth on Highway 45D, heading west towards Flagstaff. The time was 1 o'clock in the morning, just a few hours after Mrs. Pilar saw her leave." I gripped the phone tightly, feeling like I was holding onto a thin thread that could lead me to the truth. "Are you sure, David?" I asked, although I knew he never reported anything without verifying it properly. "Sure, ma'am," he replied. "We are checking all businesses along that route." 2 days later, an important clue emerged. David called me, this time with a slightly excited tone. "Mrs. Mary, an employee at a gas station on the outskirts of Winslow reported something. He saw the search alert and recognized Valerie. Can you come to the department right now? I didn't hesitate. I grabbed my car keys and sped off to the police station. When I arrived, David was already waiting for me, next to a thin young man, who didn't seem to be more than 20 years old, wearing a gas station uniform. His name was John, and his voice was clear but shaky as he recounted. Around 2 o'clock that morning, a silver sedan pulled into the station. The woman driving it was wearing a hooded sweatshirt that covered her head. She paid in cash. She looked strange. The whole time she was looking in the rearview mirror as if someone were following her. David leaned towards him and asked, "Did you see anything else, John? Any detail?" John nodded. His eyes lit up as if he had just remembered something. "Yes, when I gave her the change, I saw a long, still bleeding scratch on the back of her right hand. I asked her if she was okay. She started, pulled her hand back immediately, and muttered something about hurting herself while fixing the car, and then sped away." I stood there, listening to John's every word, and Valerie's image appeared in my mind. She was no longer the sweet girl from family dinners, but a desperate woman, fleeing in the night. The scratch on her hand. Was it the result of a struggle with Robert? I clenched my fist. My nails dug into my palm, but I didn't feel pain. There was only rage and the sting of loss. The car's trail was lost after it diverted onto a state road where there were no surveillance cameras. The search extended for almost another week, and every day that passed was hell. I barely ate, didn't sleep. I just sat by the phone, waiting for a call from David. Every time it rang, my heart clenched, a mix of hope and fear. Until, on a grey afternoon, that call came. David spoke, his voice grave but urgent. "Mrs. Mary, we found the car. A patrol from the Arizona State Police found it on a dirt road near an abandoned farm. The license plates match." I wanted to rush to the scene, but David stopped me. "Mrs. Mary, the forensic team is working. Stay home. I'll let you know as soon as there is news." Reluctantly, I accepted, but I couldn't sit still. I paced back and forth in the living room, looking at Robert and Valerie's wedding photo on the mantelpiece. Their smiles now seemed like a mockery. An hour later, David called again, and the tone of his voice let me know that the news was not good. "Mrs. Mary, we opened the trunk." He paused, as if looking for the gentlest way to say it. Inside, the trunk lining was soaked with blood. The quick analysis indicates that the amount of blood is too great to come from a single wound. The victim almost certainly lost their life. I felt my legs tremble, but David hadn't finished. "We also found a small package wrapped in torn plastic. It contained synthetic drugs, the type the narcotics investigation unit is looking for. It may have fallen out when Valerie was moving something." I wanted him to stop, but David kept talking. His voice choked. "And there was something else, tucked into a corner of the trunk. A wool scarf, navy blue with grey stripes." I didn't need to hear more. That was the scarf I myself knitted for Robert for his birthday last year. The gift I chose because it looks good on you. It looks strong and warm. I collapsed onto the sofa. The phone fell from my hands. That scarf, the last gift I gave my son, was now in a blood-soaked trunk. The final proof that Robert was gone. With that irrefutable evidence, the arrest warrant against Valerie was raised to the highest level. Her file was sent to Interpol, turning her into an internationally wanted killer. The next 3 weeks were the longest period of my life. Every day that passed, I felt like I was living in a nightmare with no way out. The hope of finding Robert, even just his body, grew fainter, like a candle flickering in the wind. The drive of an investigator that once made me strong had now faded, giving way to the persistent pain of a mother who has lost her son. I barely left the house. I just sat by the old phone, my eyes glued to the screen, waiting for a call from David. Every time it rang, my heart clenched, torn between hope and fear. But most of the time it was just wrong numbers, or neighbors asking how I was, which plunged me further into despair. I lived like a ghost, wandering through the empty house that was once filled with Robert's laughter. I didn't dare touch his mementos, the scarf I knitted, his graduation photo, because just looking at them, I felt like I couldn't breathe. But I also couldn't look away, as if stopping looking was letting Robert disappear forever. Every night, I lay in bed with my eyes wide open in the dark, trying to picture my son's face, to remember his voice. "Mum, I'll be fine," he told me. But now, all I have in my hands is a blood-stained wedding ring and a pain that won't go away. And then, early one morning, just as dawn was breaking, the phone vibrated. David's name appeared on the screen, and I answered with trembling hands. "Mrs. Mary," his voice said, relieved but tense. "We got her. We arrested Valerie." I froze, feeling the whole world stop. Where is she?" I asked, my voice broken. David explained, talking fast but clear. "We received a tip from an informant within a gang in New Mexico. He wanted to take down his rival, so he tipped off a large drug shipment that was about to cross the border. The federal police and the DEA raided an old warehouse on the outskirts of Albuquerque. They arrested the entire gang. They confiscated hundreds of pounds of illegal merchandise, and among them was Valerie Montiel." I sat down in a chair, my hand on my chest, trying to breathe. David continued. "She's not the same, Mrs. Mary. Her hair is matted, her clothes are dirty, her gaze is lost. When they handcuffed her, she didn't resist. She just stayed still, as if she already knew this day would come." His words painted a portrait of Valerie. She was no longer the intelligent, sweet woman I once loved, but a cornered criminal. I wanted to feel relief, but instead, there was only a chilling emptiness that spread within me. The news of the arrest spread like wildfire. When I turned on the television, Valerie's escorted image appeared on all channels. She kept her head down, her hair covering her face, and her hands were cuffed behind her back, walking between two police officers. The headline on the screen made me shudder. "Husband's killer, hidden leader of an international drug trafficking ring." All of America was shocked to discover that a seemingly intellectual accountant was actually a ruthless killer. I turned off the television, unable to see her face for another second. She had taken Robert from me. She had destroyed everything I had. And now she was there, in front of the whole world, as a complete stranger. That afternoon, David called again with a grave and respectful voice. "Mrs. Mary, Valerie has been transferred back to Phoenix. The first interrogation will be tomorrow morning. I asked my superior for permission. You can come and observe from behind the one-way glass. You were the one who pointed this investigation in the right direction. You deserve to hear the truth." I nodded, even though he couldn't see me. "Thank you, David," I replied in a hoarse voice. "I'll be there." That night, I opened the closet and took out the grey suit I used to wear for important trials when I was still on the force. It fit me perfectly, as if time hadn't passed. But when I looked in the mirror, I saw a different woman. My hair had many more grey streaks. My eyes were sunken from so many sleepless nights. But my gaze was still as sharp as in the days when I faced the most dangerous criminals. That suit had been my armor, and now I needed it more than ever. I smoothed the lapels, took a deep breath, and whispered to myself, "Mary, you have to be strong. For Robert." I couldn't sleep that night. I sat in the living room, looking at Robert and Valerie's wedding photo on the mantelpiece. Both of their smiles were once my greatest joy, but now it was like a wound that wouldn't stop bleeding. I thought of Valerie, the times she hugged me, called me Mum, with that sweet voice. How could she do something like that? How could she kill my son and continue living as if nothing happened? The pain mixed with rage, but above all, I craved the truth. I needed to hear from Valerie's own mouth why she did it, why she took Robert from me, why she took everything from me. The next morning, I drove to the precinct. Every turn of the wheels brought me closer to an abyss. David was waiting for me at the entrance, with a respectful look, but also a hint of worry. "Are you okay, Mrs. Mary?" he asked softly. I nodded, although I knew I wasn't okay at all. "Take me inside, David," I said firmly. "I need to see her." He led me through the familiar hallways, the same ones I walked many times as an officer. Now, I was just a mother, burdened with the pain and determination to face the one who destroyed her family. The interrogation room was ice cold, with a grey metal table and 3 rigid chairs. I stood in the observation room, a few steps away, looking through the one-way glass. David was beside me, silent, but I could feel the tension in his breathing. I crossed my arms, trying to keep myself steady, even though my legs were trembling. Valerie, the daughter-in-law I once loved, was about to enter, and I knew that what I was about to hear would change everything. 2 police officers escorted Valerie in. She was wearing a baggy, disheveled orange prison uniform. Her black hair, once long and silky, was now matted, dull, like an abandoned bird's nest. Her handcuffed hands rested on the table. She kept her head bowed, her eyes fixed on her trembling fingers. I looked at her, trying to find the young woman who used to call me Mom, with a radiant smile, but I only saw a stranger, gaunt and terrified. I felt a knot in my chest, not out of pity, but for the truth that she was the one who took Robert's life. The officer in charge of the interrogation, an older man with grey hair and a voice as grave as stone, sat down opposite Valerie. He was not in a hurry. He opened the file, took out each piece of evidence, and placed it on the table with chilling precision. First was a photo of Robert's wedding ring, with dried blood embedded in the groove of the engraving. "We found this under the drinks cabinet," he said, in a monotonous voice. Valerie shuddered slightly but didn't lift her head, only squeezed her hands tighter. Next came the forensic report, full of numbers and technical terms that described an enormous amount of blood in the car's trunk. "This is not a minor injury," the officer emphasized. "It is the amount of blood from someone who has lost their life." Valerie bit her lip. Her shoulders began to tremble. Then he placed a copy of John, the gas station employee's statement on the table, describing a long scratch on her arm. "He said you looked desperate, as if you were running away," the officer added with a cold look. Valerie remained silent, but I noticed she was struggling to stay composed. Finally, he placed the navy blue scarf with grey stripes on the table, the gift I knitted with my own hands for Robert. "How do you explain this?" he asked. This time his tone had a hint of accusation. Valerie looked up, and upon seeing the scarf, her defense wall came crashing down. Her shoulders shook, choked sobs escaped her throat, which soon turned into uncontrollable crying, so heartbreaking that I felt like my chest was tearing. "I didn't mean to," she murmured, her voice broken with tears. Between sobs, Valerie began to speak, her tone disjointed, as if clinging to the last spark of strength she had left. "It all started with some investments. I lost a lot of money." She recounted that she had secretly used both of their savings to invest in the stock market, hoping for quick profits. But the market collapsed, and she lost everything. Debts to loan sharks grew. Threatening calls came in the middle of the night, but her pride was so great that she didn't dare to tell Robert, much less ask me for help. I didn't want Mum to think I failed. She sobbed, and I felt a dagger pierce my heart. Mum, she still called me that, even in this moment. She recounted that in the midst of her desperation, an old acquaintance appeared who convinced her to transport merchandise with the promise of a big payment. Just one trip, she repeated with a shaky voice. Just one trip would be enough to pay everything off. But one trip turned into several. The easy money blinded her, and from being a simple courier, she ended up storing drugs in her own house. I, behind the glass, tightly gripped the edge of the chair, feeling my blood boil. She had turned Robert's home into a crime warehouse, and my son, a man who always fought for justice, was the one who paid the price. Robert found out, Valerie continued, clutching her head as if trying to chase away the memories. He saw the secretive calls, the night outings. That night he found a package hidden in the closet. She paused, tears streaming down her face. He didn't yell at me. He just looked at me, with an expression full of disappointment. He told me, Valerie, tomorrow morning we are going to the precinct. You have to turn yourself in. We will face it together. I felt like I couldn't breathe. Robert, my son, had done what I always taught him, to face the truth, choose justice, even if it hurts. But Valerie, she chose another path. I panicked, she recounted, her voice in pieces. I was afraid of being arrested, of going to jail, of losing everything. I started packing things in the suitcase. I wanted to run away. Robert stopped me. We struggled. He grabbed my arm. He wouldn't let me go. I just wanted to escape. So I pushed him. She fell silent, her crying stuck in her throat. He tripped. He hit his back against a shelf, and then the back of his head against the corner of the glass coffee table. He fell to the floor. There was a lot of blood. I rested my forehead against the cold glass, tears streaming down non-stop. The image of Robert lying there, with the blood spreading across the floor, made me want to scream. Valerie continued, as if confessing for the last time. I tried to give him first aid, but it didn't work. He wasn't breathing anymore. I didn't know what I was doing. I just wanted to hide everything. She used all the cleaning products in the house, scrubbing the floor, the walls, over and over again, until she almost suffocated from the smell of bleach. Alone in the dark, she dragged Robert's body to the back door. She wrapped him in a thick blanket and put him in the car trunk. She drove to a remote mountainous area near Flagstaff, where they had previously gone hiking. With a small garden shovel, she dug a shallow hole and buried my son. I didn't want to kill him, she screamed, looking up at the glass as if she knew I was there. It was an accident. I was too scared. I didn't know what I was doing. According to her statement, the police found Robert's body. She did not lie. My son was carefully wrapped in the blanket, placed with respect, as if some humanity still remained in her. The burial was clumsy, rushed, but there were no signs of desecration. That proved a painful truth. It was not premeditated murder, but a horrifying accident caused by fear and mistake. But that didn't alleviate my pain. I rested my forehead against the glass. The tears kept falling uncontrollably. For the first time since all this began, I cried. Not out of weakness, but because the pain was too much, like a wave drowning me. I was furious with Valerie, with her stupidity and her cowardice. I felt compassion for her, because a part of me still remembered the girl who was my daughter-in-law. But above all, I felt hatred, because she had taken Robert from me, my only son, the greatest pride and love of my life. The trial was carried out quickly, leaving me with an impossible void to fill. The evidence was irrefutable. The blood-stained wedding ring, the amount of blood in the car trunk, Valerie's confession, everything led the judge to issue a verdict without much delay. Valerie and her accomplices in the drug trafficking network were sentenced to long prison terms. When the sentence was read, I was sitting in the front row, silent, feeling no relief. Justice had been done, but Robert, my son, would never come back. On the day of the final sentencing, the courtroom was filled with the murmurs of the press and the flashes of cameras. Valerie, dressed in the orange prison uniform, was escorted by two officers. She walked with her head down, slowly, like a shadow of what she once was. But suddenly she stopped. She turned, her eyes searched through the crowd, and when she saw me, time seemed to stop. In the middle of the media chaos, her voice was heard, weak but clear. "Mom, I'm sorry. I'm sorry for everything." I remained seated, paralyzed, my hands clutching the edge of the seat. Her gaze was full of repentance, but I couldn't respond. I just looked at her. I looked at that daughter-in-law I once loved like a daughter, and who was now the one who had taken Robert's life. When her silhouette disappeared behind the door to the prison area, I knew it was the last time I would see her. A part of me wanted to scream, to ask her why, but another part just wanted to forget everything. Robert's body was finally returned to the family. The funeral was quiet, on a drizzly afternoon, with only the closest people present. I stood in front of his grave, with a white rose in my hand. The flower, Robert used to say, was as pure as his mother's heart. The wind blew through the cemetery trees, rustling the leaves like a whisper of farewell. I knelt, placed the rose on the cold headstone, and murmured, "Robert, rest in peace. Mum will keep going. For you." The tears rolled down my cheeks, but I didn't wipe them away. It was the last time I cried for my son. The days that followed, I lived like a ghost. My house, which was once full of laughter, was now too big, too silent. Every object reminded me of Robert. The coffee cup he used, the law book he left on the shelf, the photo we took together in Charleston. I didn't dare to touch them, but I couldn't stop looking at them either. There were nights when I sat in the living room, hugging the navy blue scarf I once knitted for him, smelling the faded aroma of the wool, wondering if I could continue living without Robert. Until one day, while turning on the television to fill the silence, I saw the image of another mother on the news. She was sobbing, hugging a photo of her son, a young man who had just been arrested for drug trafficking. Her sunken, pain-filled eyes were the same ones I saw in the mirror every day. In that woman's suffering, I saw a reflection of myself. I turned off the television, sat in the dark, and for the first time, I asked myself, if I continue to sink into grief, is that what Robert would want for his mother? Could this family tragedy bring about something good? I started to change. One morning, David called with a gentle voice. "Mrs. Mary, the police are organizing a drug prevention campaign in schools and communities. They want to invite you as a speaker to tell your story. Would you like to try it?" I hesitated, but then I nodded. "I'll do it, David. For Robert." For the first time, standing in front of a crowd in an auditorium full of students and parents, my hands trembled so much I almost dropped the microphone. I told my story. About Robert, about Valerie, about the mistakes that destroyed my family. My voice broke when I mentioned my son, but I didn't stop. Looking down, I saw eyes full of compassion, silent tears in the eyes of other mothers, and I knew I had done the right thing. Dear young people, I said with a choked voice, think about your family before choosing a wrong path. Don't make the people who love you suffer like I have. After that talk, I received many thanks, hugs from strangers, and letters from students promising not to go near drugs. I realized that my story, although painful, could be a warning. I continued participating in campaigns. I traveled all over Arizona and then other nearby states, carrying Robert's story to prevent similar tragedies. I used my savings and the money from the trial settlement to create a small fund called Robert's Light. The fund not only offers financial aid, but also psychological and legal counseling for mothers with children in difficult situations. I met with them, listened to their stories, and helped them find the strength to support their children in the process of rebuilding their lives. Every time I see a young person determined to quit drugs, every time a family manages to reconcile, I feel Robert's presence. My son is gone, but his light is still alive in what I do. My life never went back to how it was before. The pain of losing Robert is a wound that doesn't close, an impossible void to fill. There are nights when I still can't sleep, hugging my son's scarf, crying. But every morning I get up, put on my old coat, and continue my mission. I no longer live just for myself, but so that Robert is not forgotten, so that my family's tragedy becomes a light for others. Robert was reborn, in a different way, in this new life and mission that I carry. I tell all this not to evoke pity, but to awaken those who walk on that thin line between love and silence. If I hadn't trusted blindly, if I hadn't taken so long to ask questions, maybe Robert would still be alive. My story of vengeance was not born of hatred, but of a mother's love and the thirst for justice. It was clarity, reason, and the courage to face the truth that allowed me to get to the bottom of things and reveal everything that was hidden under a false appearance of morality. I want to tell everyone who doubts their intuition, don't keep silent for fear of hurting someone, because that silence can kill the one you love the most. The story you just heard has modified names and places to protect the identity of those involved. We are not telling it to judge, but with the hope that someone will listen and stop to reflect. How many mothers are suffering in silence within their own home? I sincerely ask myself, if you were in my shoes, what would you do? Would you remain silent to keep the peace? Or would you dare to face everything to reclaim your voice? I'd love to know your opinion on this painful story, or any suggestions you have to improve our content. God always blesses, and I am sure that courage will lead us to better days. In the meantime, on the final screen, I'll leave you two of the channel's most beloved stories. I think they will surprise you. Thank you for staying with me until this moment. This whole experience taught me that true wealth isn't measured in dollars or fame, but in the quality of the connections we keep and the courage we find to live authentically. We often wait for a major event to change, but the real magic is in the small, consistent choices we make every day to be better, kinder people. Moving forward, I'm prioritizing open communication and trusting my gut, because a life well lived is one where you are honest with yourself and those you love. Happiness isn't a destination, it's a commitment to growth and grace, one day at a time.